All right, we've got a lot to talk about and not a lot of time to talk about it in. So hello there, and I want to remind you quickly about something that happened at last year's Macaduck. We had a presentation last year from our friends at Apple where they said things like separating a managed key store from the user key store is a challenge on a deep technical level, and that use cases for that key store are certainly interesting. And then they said that there are a lot of deep architectural issues at play. And that they said that this was a complicated subject, by which I mean having multiple Apple IDs associated with the machine at the same time. So what did we all hear in that conversation moment? We heard this. We heard this isn't happening right now, and Charles and I sat up on the stage with Joel Rennick, and during the podcast said basically, well, it's a real bummer that Apple's decided that's not happening, at least not yet. That's what we heard. What they actually meant was this is happening in exactly 3 weeks. So my hats are off to the wizards in Cupertino for all of their work here, because we are now in a place where managed Apple IDs are a possibility for a lot of organizations where that wasn't necessarily the case before. So the important thing is sometimes that you must listen to what's being said out loud, but recognize that you have to take away from the conversation something that may be very different. This is not always a skill that we are properly attuned to. And it was a very pleasant reminder for me that sometimes what I'm hearing is not what I should be processing. So here we are, talking about managed Apple IDs. Are they a threat or a menace? No, that's not the right framing for this. Will I need a psychiatrist? I can't promise you either way, friends. But I can say that there are good things to have. At least you won't need it for this alone. We have a lot to talk about that may require that. And of course, for Ben, how much faffing about will there be? And the answer is quite a lot. So that leads us to the final title of this talk, which is really Federation, Challenges and Opportunities. So hi, I'm Tom Bridge. I'm the Director of Product Management for Devices at JumpCloud. We're an IDP and a UEM, and we do both of those things together. If you want to talk more about that, find me at the break. We're going to be talking about 5 things today, and we're going to be talking about it fairly quickly. I apologize for the pace. There's only 35 minutes, and there's 53 slides. So we're going to talk about what managed Apple IDs are. We're going to talk about why you want to federate authentication. You're going to talk about who you can federate to and what your choices are there. In addition, when you should consider doing the federation of managed Apple IDs and starting to distribute managed Apple IDs in your organization. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where all of this is going, assuming we make it that far. So, the important thing, what is a managed Apple ID? It's an Apple ID that your people do not individually own. You, and by I mean the broader you, being your organization, owns that Apple ID, that credential. Which means IT can reset the password, which is really great because a lot of people have trouble with passwords. And you can reset them without having to go through a lot of detailed processes. It also gives you the ability to log into services that are provided by Apple and deliver things using those services. In addition, it gives you some extra superpowers as an admin. And we'll talk about what those are. So when we think about iCloud, we think oftentimes about iCloud on the web, or we think about iCloud on an iOS device, or we think about Apple Business Manager as a great way to gain access to a really pivotal tool for organizations to use. And all of these are appropriate use cases for businesses to use, provided that you're not using personal credentials which you do not own. Managed Apple IDs are meant for the enterprise. That's the really exciting part about using them in the business context. You don't need to worry about them walking away when your users walk away. You can reclaim licenses from them, you can reclaim data from them in some cases, and there's a lot of great opportunities here for businesses to do interesting things. And what kind of interesting things I mean? I'm talking about user-enrolled iOS devices first and foremost. User-enrolled iOS devices don't belong to your organization. Okay, quick show of hands. Of all of you, is your company buying iPhones for every person in your environment? A couple hands go up. I'd like more hands could go up because I have a lot of Apple stock, and I'd like it to go up too. But I can certainly understand that nobody's budget has that in its environment. We certainly recognize that paying for a $1,000 device every 3 years for your employees is a huge expense. And that's assuming you're getting the mid-range model and not the high-end version of this. User enrollment can provide a solid brick wall between your personal applications and your professional applications. And those work applications can be enrolled directly from an MDM solution of your choosing. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm showing you mine. And in these cases, what you want to be able to handle with all of that is assign in to your personal device for your work presence, and to create a separate APFS container on the device that's keyed against that managed Apple ID. So what can we do? You can sign into Apple services. This is great because sometimes Apple makes a pretty good cloud service. And it's very handy to be able to use reminders and calendars and other things along those lines with your managed Apple IDs. Starting last year, you could anchor an iCloud keychain with passkeys against your managed Apple ID. This is new and different and amazing. Caveat, no asterisks, sorry about that, but you may have exactly one iCloud keychain. And it belongs to the Apple ID that is first signed into. So if you have somebody's personal iPhone and they are using iCloud keychain, that is the iCloud keychain slot that they have and they have access to. Sorry. If you want a second managed Apple ID, if you would like a second iCloud keychain, may I recommend opening up Feedback Assistant and providing Apple some feedback that would be helpful. Please catch up with me later and I will give you a feedback number to duplicate. But in these cases, the first iCloud account that is signed into gets an iCloud keychain that can be filled full of passkeys from your MDM or from your environment. And in a lot of cases, that's the experience that a lot of people are used to and are comfortable with and really enjoy. In addition, you can support continuity features like handoff. That requires iCloud keychain. I have a Jump Cloud laptop and a personal iPhone. They don't talk to each other. That's a bummer for me because I really like the continuity features of iPad and iPhone, and I can't close that gap. I want to be able to close that gap in the future, and if your environment supports an iCloud keychain and you've signed in with your managed Apple ID first, that's the opportunity that you have available to combine those personal and professional devices in a safe and meaningful way. In addition, you can use a managed Apple ID with Sign In with Apple to sign into third-party services. These are organizations who are essentially using Apple like an IDP for consumer and software as a service accounts so that you can sign in with a managed Apple ID and create an account on their environment. So this Sign In with Apple program is unique. It is really cool. There's a lot of really great stuff within the documentation that'll be in the slides later. In addition, you can perform that user enrollment for a BYOD iOS app. We'll talk more about that in a second. In addition, you can use these managed Apple IDs to back up iOS devices, again, up to the free tier of 5 gigabytes of storage, which is worth 20, 30 minutes on an iPhone these days. In addition, you can use iCloud Drive, again, up to that 5 gig limit. I'd really like to be able to buy more storage, Apple, to go with those spaces. I can't yet, and I want to. In addition, starting last year, the bold items are things that are new. You can gate access to developer tools using the managed Apple ID and some settings with an Apple Business Manager. And last but not least, you can hold identities and cards in Wallet and have that be associated with your managed Apple ID. Again, requires iCloud keychain, so it needs to be the first Apple ID that's assigned into on the individual device. So, the important question, the question we have all been asking for many, many years. Why should I actually deploy these? I have a really great answer for you. Managed apps on unmanaged devices. Who here has a security policy that says in order to sign in on a given service, you must be on a managed device? I see a lot of hands, a lot of the same hands that we talked about before. You can establish a managed beachhead on a personal device without compromising the privacy of the individual involved with user enrollment for iOS. This is its primary and best use in user enrollment cases. It is awesome because you get what you need, which is control of the APFS container where the applications live, and they get what they need in terms of privacy protection so that you are not prying on their personal life by just having work on their phone. So many times when we go to do a device enrollment or an ADE enrollment, we are giving away the keys to the kingdom on that individual device, and your users, they can make choices. They can say, yes, I trust you, or no, I do not. They do not have to make that choice because the technological restrictions that are at play in user enrollment for iOS are comforting to the end user in that regard. And so in this case, both sides hold some of the trust in the other party without giving up the privacy. And most important, enrollment gates access so that you can enroll those devices with a managed Apple ID whose credentials belong to the organization and can be tied to an identity provider. And then they can receive a lightweight policy suite which guarantees that they have a PIN or a non-simple PIN that's 6 digits long, which comforts your security organization. And you can deploy some key objects of trust like certificates, like credentials in a lot of cases, or accounts, and very most importantly, applications as well. So if we think about the average user base, we have a 20-60-20 curve. And if we talk to people, as we talk to people about how they see those devices, there are 20% of users who are always going to do what IT tells them. These are my favorite people. Don't tell them. I don't want them getting a big head. But these are people who are comfortable following instructions. They feel good about the technological systems. There are 20% of people that are going to just do it because they want access to work on their personal device. There are also 20% of people who are never going to do this. It does not matter what assurances you make. They're just never going to do it, and they're going to ask for a company-owned phone, or they're going to say, I don't work mobily, I work on my work computer. It's fine. That's a choice that you can make. In the middle, we kind of have a skeptical audience that we get to talk to, and that we get to share with, and we get to have a good conversation with around the benefits of being able to work from a personal device, no matter where you are. There are huge trade-offs that are associated with this in our current environment. People worry about their privacy. What does my IT administrator see? What can security see on my personal device? And so in order to convince this 60% in the middle, you have to do a little bit of homework. And you have to share a lot of communications associated with this. So there's a maybe in that middle. This is your hardest challenge. And it is not a technological one. It is a human one. It is a policy one, and you have to overcome it. So, what we want is to take your personal phone on the left there. That is actually my home screen. You can see I've got the map for Brighton there, and I went for a good walk, so my rings were happy. On the right side, though, I have additional applications that were only possible to be put there by the MDM that I'm enrolled in, and the fact that I'm enrolled in a user environment. Now, forgive the journal, I just didn't move it off the second page, but those are the important pieces for us to see here. There's a lot of functional space in this to get from a stock standard or personalized iOS device to go to a user enrollment environment. So, on the left is what your device knows. On the left, you get a serial number, you get a telephone number, you get a MAC address, you get a whole bunch of application information. If you enroll this device in a device enrollment or an automated device enrollment, you will know as the administrator all of those things. You can ask the device, hey, what's your serial number? And it will tell you. You can ask it, what's your phone number, or what phone numbers do you have, and it will tell you. You can ask it for the MAC address. All of those privacy preserving things are available. Excuse me, those are not privacy preserving things. Those are privacy exposing things in a lot of ways. And those are available in device enrollment configurations. They are not available in user enrollment. I don't know the phone number of that device. I do not know its serial number. I do not know anything except for an enrollment ID that is generated in lieu of those other key identifiers. As an MDM, I can know that there's an enrollment identifier, and I can only know about the apps that I have deployed as the MDM. And so as a result, it doesn't need to know that I have Instagram installed, or Facebook, or WhatsApp, or Hoova, or Airbnb, or 1Password, any of these individual applications that are about my personal private life. You as the administrator cannot see, nor should you. And that's important to your end users. It's very important to your end users. So if we think about it from this perspective, here's what you can do in a user enrollment environment. You can keep work apps separate. You can require a 6-digit non-simple, which is to say not Kanye's 111111 passcode. You can set a restriction that allows you to restrict the ability to take screenshots. You can require that the pasteboard not be used across managed and unmanaged applications. You can also, at any point, delete managed applications and accounts and other things at the unenrollment time. Last but not least, you can apply accounts in that managed APFS container. And so all of your corporate data that exists as part of your user enrollment goes to a place where you have the keys and they have the keys, and either can opt out at any given time. When one of those parties opts out, the APFS container is destroyed, and all of the data that was on the device is no longer. And that is a single action that either party can take at any time. So if you want to go on vacation, I recommend Saint-Tropez this time of year. I hear it's lovely. But you can sign out of work with a single stroke at that point. In that point, you can also send applications. But, and this isn't a very important but, you cannot replace an unmanaged application with its managed cousin. So that operation will fail under user enrollment. Again, contact me for a feedback ID. I am more than happy to supply. It would be really nice if I could either have a second version of that application or to be able to move that data over to the managed partition. So some key items to handle. All right, like I said before, that 60% in the middle is really, really important. And there's a lot for you to think about in terms of how we talk to our users about what this means. You're going to need to make people comfortable early if you're going to start with a BYOD program based on Managed Apple IDs. You're going to need to explain what a Managed Apple ID can and can't do. You're going to need to explain what you can and cannot see. And most importantly, you're going to need to demonstrate that so that they believe you. Because seeing is, in fact, believing. And you have to show this to the people in order so that they can't see you don't know their phone number, and it says phone number dash, serial number dash. You do get to know the version of the operating system, but that's about it. You need to clarify your Apple ID plan and what those can be used for within your business to your people. This is not hard. This is very straightforward, and there's good ways to turn Apple's documentation into your documentation. Most importantly, if you want this to work, you have to provide utility and usefulness to your end users so that they go through the hassle. And they need to trust you all the way. Your trust is their ability to do work on their device. So, we've talked a lot about what this could be used for, and now there's a really important question. Why on earth would I federate my identity? Instead of just trusting Apple and letting them set a password and a 6-digit push ID or a text message through 2SV. We need to talk a little bit about the beginning of time and the password. And we know what the inherent problems of passwords are. People write them down. They maybe don't set up MFA. It's not ideal. And so you get a list like this that's written on a sticky note that lives under the, if you're lucky, it lives underneath their desk drawer instead of on their display. But we also need to talk about the difference between authentication, which is are you who you say you are, versus authorization. Are you supposed to be here? And so if we think about authentication, or authn, we can think about things in terms of passwords and passkeys and identity certificates and PIN numbers, or I guess just PINs, sorry. I always do that. I'm an American. I say ATM machine too. Or hardware tokens. These are all great ways of authenticating a user and knowing that they are who they say they are. In addition, authorization coupled with authentication lets you know things like, are they a member of a specific user group? Or do they have permission to access this individual application? Or is it the right time of day to allow them to access that information? If they are a shift worker and work between 8 and 5, if they're signing in at 11 p.m., is that really them? Are you sure? Are they supposed to be there at that time? Maybe not. In addition, you get contextual awareness about the device that they're authenticating from. You get to know if that's an iPhone or an iPad. You get to know the version of the operating system that's on that device. There are all sorts of things that you can do if you're the IDP to determine whether or not someone is supposed to be where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there. So the benefit of federation at that point is handing all of those instructions directly to your identity provider and letting them help govern that relationship. Without federation, you do not have that level of control. So, federation is about that context and control, and most importantly, it's about centralizing those things. A single user and authentication source for all of your applications. We'll get to the asterisk, I promise. It's also really important that you can group those users and provide rich information for decision-making by policy in those cases. Additionally, you need to be able to allow or deny access based on rules, like who they are, what they're doing, where they are, and what time is it. So the asterisk is an important one. This is for all applications that support external identity providers and hopefully don't make you pay the SSO tax in the process. So fortunately, Apple has chosen to make this a freely available feature. Yay! Thank you, Apple, for doing the right thing the first time. So, very important question. When is it time to start federating? And what do you do for all of those things? This concept of federating a managed Apple ID comes down to keeping control for your business. If you want to control when Apple IDs are created and for what purpose, you need to federate your domain, and that means claiming your domain with a DNS record and then starting to hook it together with Apple Business Manager. So, there are benefits for you as the admin for federating here. You get account creation using your domain. It gets to be limited to the use of Apple Business Manager so that somebody in the marketing department can't create an Apple ID and tie a bunch of services to it without you knowing about it. In addition, it lets you create accounts directly from your external directory, like Google Workspace or Okta or Azure or Jump Cloud in those cases. It also lets you know who has a company Apple ID and what rules govern it. That seems like a simple problem. It's not. It's actually a really complicated problem, and it's really important to solve it through that federation process. And then last but not least, password resets can flow through your help desk or your directory help desk. Those password resets can be painful if you have to take them through Apple. People will end up calling Apple support. Everyone gets very, very confused instead of them just calling your help desk and your password and them hitting the reset on your managed identity. So, we talked about the benefits. There is stuff you have to deal with. I chose to use the polite version of the S word in this particular case. Apple IDs created before you started this process have a time that they can hang around. That time is 60 days from when you start the clock. That's a long time in IT land, a very long time. So you're not going to do this by accident. You're going to have a plan to deal with this, and you're going to have a reasonable rollout period where you're aware of what's going on. In addition, any accounts that are already out there in the world are still going to be out there in the world. They're just not going to be under your domain name anymore. This is not ideal either, but this is where we sit. And you will still have no control over them once they have moved away from your domain. This whole process does take 60 days to complete if you have accounts that are out there in the world now. And the worst of this is that you have no way to know who has these accounts before you start. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. This is a hurdle that you have to leap over. So let's talk about the federation timeline real quick here. There's the process of verifying your domain. You have to prove that you are who you say you are to Apple, And you do that by making a text record in your domain. That text record will have a long string. Apple will then validate that that string is in fact you. And then at the conclusion of that process, you will now have a little domain in your environment that you can begin to federate and create accounts for. You will then go through the process of beginning federation. When you begin this process, there's a very, very scary dialogue that's going to tell you it's going to email anyone in your domain with an email who already has an Apple ID. Who here has done this? Who here started down that process not knowing how many of those accounts existed? Every other hand goes up. Who here went puckered a little bit when that happened? Yeah, it's not a fun moment when you realize that you also have no idea who is out there. There are ways to combat that. We'll talk about that in a second. There's a really great talk at Xworld this year about this exact subject. You also then have to resolve those Apple ID conflicts. This part is not fun. This part is the least fun because they are going to get an email from Apple that says your corporate domain has been claimed and they are going to have to change their Apple ID to something else. Your users are going to be confused if you have not warned them this is possible. You're probably going to have to warn them more than once. I found that it takes 3 emails to really get through at that point. And you got to tell people, you got to tell them what you told them, and then you got to tell them what you're going to tell them again, right? Last but not least, you finalize federation 2 months later, and then you configure provisioning to start to set up new managed Apple IDs. And then you are free to begin your program. So who can you federate to? Until this past January, your options were Google or Entra ID. Then it was called Azure AD. I'm sorry, this slide is old. But the answer today is a little bit different. It is Google, Azure AD, or Entra ID, and anyone who does OpenID Connect and Shared Signals Framework. And so that is a phenomenal piece. Okta has this in private preview. We also have a beta program I'm happy to talk about privately. And you'll have the opportunity to create and manage Apple IDs through your third-party IDP. This is good. It is not free of complication. So how does federation itself work? We've got to talk about OpenID for Connect for a second. And the question that this all starts from is, what if I just wanted to use one identity everywhere? And OpenID Connect as an organization was begun in 2005 by the guy who started LiveJournal? What? Are you telling me that a bunch of emo kids are responsible for how we tokenize identity everywhere? Yes! Thank you, emo kids. I appreciate you. This is great. So the virtuous relationship that we have here once you have OpenID Connect in place is that the directory on the left can apply user accounts via the System for Cross-Identity Management, or SCIM, to Apple, and then Apple can redirect access through your IDP at that point. So what's that look like? On the left, we have a user with their user and password and probably their MFA. On the right-hand side, we have a directory like Azure or Google or JumpCloud or Okta. In the middle, we have Apple Business Manager, which is the relying party for this case. So how does this all work? The user goes to Apple Business Manager and starts to log in. They will put their username in and click Next. What happens next is that you're redirected in a new window to your IDP. The IDP will ask the user for their credential. The user will give the credential back to the environment. The IDP will make a decision at that point to whether or not you get in. And then you're completed. And so if you're thinking to yourself, Tom, wait, isn't this just more passwords? The answer is no. It's tokens. Tokens are better than passwords. We like tokens. Tokens are good. OpenID tokens are a little bit like that District of Columbia driver's license in the upper right-hand side. On a successful authentication, you get an ID token, which is that driver's license in the upper right, and you get an access token, that's that trolley token on the bottom. ID tokens say who you are, and they are oftentimes encoded but not encrypted. Access tokens let you through the streetcar turnstile and complete an authentication session. They prove that you are supposed to be there. So first we need to know who you are with an ID token, and the second we need to know is what you actually get used for. So these individual authorization actions come from the tokens. And so when you give an access token to a service provider, That's your way in. And on a successful authorization, you get a session cookie, which says, I'm supposed to be here. This web service is for me. I am good now. Here's my token. Let me get back in. And you get another access token. So it's like it's like putting your quarter on a string and playing in the arcade game. And then, oh God, I really just dated myself. I'm sorry. Okay, most access tokens are only ever good for one authorization. After that, you need a new authorization token. You need another access point. And so that's why you get your next access token. You throw away the one that you just used. It's no good to anyone anymore. It's not like a password, because a password's always good unless it's not. So inside of an ID token, you get a bunch of useful information about that person. This is Thomas' sample card. He was on the driver's license you just saw, and it has a whole bunch of useful information there, including an expiration date. That's an epoch time. That was yesterday sometime. And the time of issuance, issued at. And so all of these things are included in the IT token, along with headers and cryptographic signatures that prove that you are who you say you are. And so I need you to understand something real quick. Yes, I know that you just got over your overwhelming fear of Kerberos. So have I. I promise that these, while they look like ticket-granting tickets from Kerberos, I know it's okay. It's going to be okay. I just want you to know it's going to be okay. Since you don't have to do your own DNS for this, you can't brick yourself into a corner with Open Directory. It's going to be okay, I promise. Okay, it's not scary. So we talked about OpenID Connect. This also includes Shared Signals Framework. Shared Signals Framework is a way to tell a relying party what's been going on with that identity in the meantime. Because otherwise, the IDP and the relying party, they don't talk a lot. It's not that we don't spend a lot of time. We just redirect traffic and back and forth. But sometimes, if you wanted to, for example, kill someone's Apple ID session, Apple would need to know a way to do that. They would need to know a reason for doing that. And so we have the Shared Signals Framework. It is a draft specification of the OpenID group, and the latest updates were in the middle of last year. We don't know when ratification is. Shared Signals Framework as a technology is not widely adopted in the industry yet. Apple's on the vanguard here, so high five Apple for being at the front of the line. So the answer here is, what happens if I change my password? And so when we think about the shared signal spaces that we have, we think a little bit about like a train yard. Because if I want to get through, I want to know the track is clear. I want to be able to send that signal up the line that says, hey, we made a change here and that we're going to be switching tracks. And so what we get is the three-legged stool. The user changes their password at their IDP. The IDP notifies Apple, hey, Thomas sample card changed his password just now. And the user gets a note on their phone, hey, would you please re-authenticate with your new Apple ID password? Which happens to be their new IDP password. So there are other events that are super helpful here. And an admin might go in and say, you know what, Thomas sample card is in trouble. We think he took $200 from the till. We're suspending his user while we figure this out. And so at that point, your IDP has to tell Apple, hey, by the way, Thomas sample card has just been suspended. And then it will prompt Thomas sample card to sign back in again. This event can go over the Shared Signals Framework channel. With Apple IDs, it does not. It actually goes through the SCIM channel. And so the utility of the Shared Signals Framework channel has everything to do with password change and not about account security events which flow over SCIM, which is actually preferable in this case. So what do you need in order to federate with OpenID Connect, and where do you get it from? You need a bunch of things. You're going to need 4 things from your IDP. You're going to need a client secret and a client identifier. Those go from your IDP into Apple Business Manager. In addition, you're going to get from your IDP an OpenID Connect well-known URL. And you're going to get a shared signals URL. All of those things go into Apple Business Manager as part of the configuration. In addition, after completing that, you're going to get a redirect URL from Apple Business Manager that you're going to put into your IDP OpenID Connect token. That is what establishes the circle of trust there. And so we have to talk about provisioning, because right now, There are 2 ways to create a managed Apple ID in Apple Business Manager, and there are 3 ways if you are fortunate enough to have Apple School Manager in this regard. The 2 ways for Business Manager are create them by hand, like a caveman, or create them with provisioning, which is automated, and that is much better. Because if you have hundreds of Apple IDs you need to create, and you can't do it by yourself, because that doesn't sound like fun, you have to federate in order to get those processes. So, in these cases, oh, and I shouldn't have cut out my School Manager friends. School Manager friends, you can actually do this with an upload. There's a way to upload at that point. You can upload those pieces. So, in this case, when it comes time to create accounts, your IDP is now the relying party. You are now the person who is, communicating back to Apple, who is the identity party. They become the IDP in that state. And so you have to go through this 3-step process to get the entire transaction required. And that also means setting up SCIM. This is the inverse of the previous. So your IDP is going to provide the client secret and the client identifier, and Apple is going to give you the redirect URL as part of this process. And so when you configure that connector, you're done. So we're now to takeaways, and I'm going to have to talk real fast as we get up to the end. For managed Apple IDs in your business, this isn't something you do by accident, and it's certainly not something you do quickly. And it's definitely something you must talk to your people about. There are really great reasons to deploy managed Apple IDs. One of the best examples, I have an iPad that I love. My company has a security policy that I do not love, which is to say I cannot use Miro on my iPad and draw on the screen because I cannot complete a device trust process, because it is not a managed application yet. And so what we want to be able to do is deploy those work applications into separate containers on your personal devices so that you can use that really nice new iPad Pro and its really fancy Apple Pencil Pro to do a lot of great stuff. But you have to support that user enrollment process. It's really important that you federate it unless you really, really like filling out the Apple ID creation form 300 or 1,000 or 10,000 times. Federation makes that easy. It also allows you to provision and deprovision your accounts automatically when your accounts provision or deprovision. Those are really important parts. The other one, if you do not have a test domain, now's the time to make one so that you can start to experiment with a test domain that's not your production environment. Somebody brought me a great sticker, "We don't test on animals, we test in production." That is my favorite from this week. So definitely make sure that you're testing in a test domain, please. That's going to let you make screenshots. It's going to let you warn people, all of those good things. Last but not least, you have to file feedback to make your use cases better. Apple needs to hear from you as to why you cannot adopt user enrollment as it stands. For one, I'm a little bit sad that apparently profile-based user enrollment is going away, and it's going to be replaced with account-driven user enrollment, where you have to set up the well-known file. Who here has a great relationship with the people who manage your website? Right, nobody's hands went up. Especially in large protected industry, what goes into your website is a very serious piece, and there's probably a lot of things that you need to address. So there's a lot for you to do better. So I would love to talk about this all day. I think I'm running out of time, but I have a booth out there, so come ask questions, and we'll talk from there. So. Thank you, Brighton. It is a pleasure to see you as always.